Hey there, I'm Rich Drew. We're here in Bentonville, Arkansas. It's time for another bike review. This time, it's the Trail 429. We're ready to blur the lines between cross country and trail. Are you ready? All right, here it is, the Trail 429. Crazy fast meets ridiculously capable. Now, what is this thing? Well, is it a cross-country bike? Is it a trail bike? Is it somewhat of an enduro bike? Who knows? This thing's absolutely blurring the lines of what all those genres mean with a bike. Now, coming into this, I had yet to ride one of these bikes on the trail, so I know it's crazy. Factory pivot rider for 2 years. In the past couple weeks, the first time I've had this bike on the trail. I was incredibly excited about it because you have to remember, my background was a pro cross-country rider before I started racing enduro. So again, like I said before, I have a soft spot in my heart for bikes like this. Now, it's on the smaller end compared to the bikes I've been riding. So in the rear, you have 120 millimeters DW link suspension. Up front, you have 130. So on paper, looking at those numbers, that's not a lot. So what can the bike do? What are we limited to? Well, again, that's tough to say. I think going into it, you obviously want a bike that's going to be fun. And so far, I've had incredible amounts of fun. But for me, BMX background, motocross background, I like smaller bikes. So I'm able to stretch the limits of what the rear travel on this thing is. So that may not be the case for everybody. So with this setup, pretty decent in regards to cross country. A little over 67-degree head angle, so I wouldn't say incredibly steep, but at the same time, it's not really twitchy when you're looking for a little bit more high-speed stability. Another thing too is seat tube angle and seat tube length. It allows me to actually sit fairly low into the bike. So when you first jump on, what you realize, the thing pedals like a rocket ship, but at the same time, it's really stable and really versatile. So it's very confidence inspiring, even if you're not the best of riders. Now, that being said, what are some other elements that we're looking at? Well, of course, you got to think about chainstay length. For me, I want to have some fun on this bike. I want to be able to throw it around, be playful, manual things, boost things, all that stuff. So 430 millimeter rear chainstay length. So for me, my test, I instantly hop on, see if I can manual this thing. I was able to do it really well. So again, talks to, I don't know, a little bit of that versatility, a little bit of that stability, but also the fun factor. Now, after I got through that, I decided, let me go rip this thing for a little bit and see what it's like more in the cross-country realm. Now, I noticed the DW Link is a very stable platform. And with this setup here, you have the Fox Float rear shock. It's got the 3 positions. So you have open, trail, and closed. Now for me, I always want to stay in the open mode, and I toggle through that blue adjuster. So this has 3 settings in open mode only. So 1, 2, and 3. 1 is the softest, 3 is the firmest. So for me, I can move back and forth through that depending on whether I'm hitting some bigger stuff or I want it nice and supple. So that gives me a decent amount of capability back there. Now we look up front, we have a Fox 34. It's 130 millimeters of travel. So at first glance, if you ask me, Rich, what would you might want to change with this bike? I'm going to tell you the first thing is probably the fork. Initially, got on, set it to the spec that Fox suggested for my rider weight, 180 pounds. So I immediately noticed it wasn't enough. If I hit something at decent speed, I would dive right through that fork. So the quick adjustment I made was go from the open platform to the trail platform. So again, this thing has 3 different settings. I tried to add a little bit of that open mode adjust, so add a little bit of dampening. It still just wasn't enough. Now, can I alleviate that? Yeah, I can probably throw some tokens in it or some volume spacers and give it a little bit better ramp up. I could also do an MRP ramp control cartridge, and I think that would make a big difference. So if you're a heavier rider, you might have to think about what this fork is gonna do. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change this fork. I'm gonna go to something a little bit different. Now, it's kind of funny I'm talking about this because a 36 in 140 millimeters of travel, which this bike is okay to use, and then a bigger setup back here, maybe a DPX2, I think would make all the difference in the world with this bike. And it just so happens, Pivot recently released the Enduro spec version of this bike, and it happens to have both of those products. We have a completely stock XT XTR 12-speed build, retail price $6,099. So incredible value for what you get. Now let's start with this XT XTR 12-speed. First time running the new Shimano 12-speed. I'd heard really good things about it, and I certainly wasn't disappointed. Now, it's kind of weird because I got on, and for the longest time, I've been preaching do not shift under power. So to be told, no, please shift under power because that's what it's designed to do, a little bit foreign, but I slowly started to get used to it. And then also having the double shift going down the cassette, I'll admit, that was pretty rad. So all in all, I'm a fan so far of this new Shimano 12-speed. Beyond that, we have the stock DT Swiss wheels. It's an M1700, pretty decent width, 30 millimeter. I decided to keep the bike completely stock and run it as you could get it. And I'm not disappointed in those wheels. On a stock build at this price, I think that wheel is pretty good. On top of that, we have in the back tire-wise, it's a 2.4 Recon, 3C, EXO, great tire in the back, especially for what this bike is meant to do. And then up front, a little bit unique because you have a Minion DHR2, and that's a 2.4 as well. So a little bit thicker tire up front to really help that thing dive in. So it balances both ends of the spectrum. Got a little bit of cross-country business back here, and then a little party up front with some big knobs. All right, so what I'll probably do next is go with the Industry 9 101s. So the newest platform for Industry 9, value price $750, and I think that'll make a really big difference with this bike. All right, so brakes. We have the XT brake setup, which is something I'm very accustomed to. Now the braking part, that's a very unique thing. So many people talk about no modulation with XT brakes. They're very on-off. I haven't had any issues. I try to do my modulation with my finger, so maybe it's just because I'm acclimated to it, but what I can say is there's something about SRAM brakes and that modulation and that feel, but it comes back to I'm very dialed into these, and I think they work really well. Fox transfer dropper, 150 millimeters, also coupled to this sweet race face lever right here, so ergonomically, this thing's pretty sound. My bike, size large. So as I've done in all of my bike overviews, I've talked about my rationale for that. I'm only 5'10", so I'm not a very tall guy, but I want a bike that's a little bit longer, longer wheelbase. It's gonna give me a little bit more stability, and then what I'm gonna do is shorten it up with stem. So I think it's very important to think about that. To have the ability to bring the stem back and shorten the bike is a lot easier and more effective than trying to go with a longer stem to make the bike a little bit more comfortable for you as a taller rider. Now, what have I done with this bike? I think the question is, what haven't I done with this bike? So I've been ripping all over Northwest Arkansas, and as most people hopefully know, the diversity of trails here is almost second to none. So I've gotten a taste of pretty much everything that this area has to offer. Now I'll say, there's been a couple situations where I might have gotten in a little too deep on this bike. Thankfully, I was able to smooth it out and I didn't have any issues. But would I suggest you do that? It's really tough to say. And I think, again, it's gonna come back to a couple different things. I might bring body weight into this mix, unlike the Switchblade and the 5.5. If you're well north of 200 pounds, this might not be the way to go if you're looking to hit some bigger things. Now, if you're very much a cross-country type rider, you want to do longer rides, fairly mellow pace, but every once in a while hit something a little bit bigger, I think this thing is awesome for that. Just enough travel, head angle's right, it's super comfortable, but I went out and hit a 50 miler the other day and I was shocked because it's been so long since I've ridden a ride that long on a bike like this, or a bike that was set up for it. I love doing 30, 40, 50 mile rides on a Firebird, but it's not very well suited to it. It'll do it and it'll do it well. But then when you get on something like this, you realize, whoa, That's what this bike is meant to do. This segment, aggressive XC, kind of blurring the lines, trail, all that stuff. There's no shortage of bikes. It's dizzying how many bikes there are in this segment. So what's gonna help you zone in on what are your choices? And again, it's so tough. First thing I would say is ride them. Ride all of these bikes. Ride everything in this realm. An Ibis Ripley, a Santa Cruz Tallboy LT, a Da Vinci Django. I mean, the list goes on and on. An SB 100. I mean, there's no shortage of bikes. It's absolutely crazy. But some of them will speak to you a little bit differently. I think this is a very solid package for a lot of riders and a lot of terrain. Now, at the end of the day, $6,099. That's certainly not a small price to pay, but I come back to, it's a pretty good value. And for most people, they could take this bike and ride it as is and have tons and tons of fun. If you want to make it a little bit more capable, different fork, different shock, maybe some different wheels, that might be it. Is the Trail 429 the bike for you? I don't know. Think about everything I talked about. Really look deep into who are you as a rider? What do you want to go do? What do you want to accomplish? You know, is the bike park somewhere in Colorado in your future? This certainly would not be the bike for that. But if you're somewhere where there's not a whole lot of elevation, or there is and you're not looking to absolutely bomb down, I think this bike might be something you should look at. All right, so what's next with this bone stock beauty? Well, you know we're gonna upgrade. First thing we're gonna do is swap the wheels out. We're gonna go with the new Industry 9 Enduro 101s. So we have yet to throw the 101s on any bike. We'll test that 90 point of engagement, $750 price tag. Next up, it's gonna be the fork. So Fox 34 is pretty darn good, but it's just not enough for what I wanna do with this bike. So I wanna test the limits of its capability, and trust me, you're gonna get the message when we bring our next review out on this bike. Other than that, we'll throw in the Cush core, some different tires, we're ready to roll. So stay tuned, and we'll come at you with some more really soon. I hope that information was valuable. I know it's tough making a bike choice, especially when we're talking this much money, but I tried to give you as much input as I could with the type of rider I am and the conditions that I'm riding in. So, gotta say, if you haven't done it yet, drop down, hit that subscribe button, maybe even leave a comment. Let me know, was this valuable? What else might you want to see moving forward? We're ramping up with a lot more content and we're excited to bring it to you very soon. See you out on the trails.